I have a short question for David and then another one for Fred. Your platform you described sounds really exciting, and I know you have a full plate already, but I just wondered if you have given any thought at all that it might be extended eventually to publishing monographs as well as articles. Go ahead.
Yes, so there's at least two directions that we're already thinking of. We don't have any bandwidth right now, but what one is, well, actually three. One is documenting the system so that it's easy for anybody else to do what we've done the hard way. And I said, and I'll say again, the developers at the Public Library of Science have been just terrific, and this is their aim too. But so we certainly want to contribute to that. The open source portion of this is only the front end. So the second area of thought activity at the moment is thinking about what we can put behind that that's also open source. So you'd have a high-end professional system that would do all the peer review piece as well, the piece that we're currently using a commercial package to do, because our business model allows us to do that. It's not the same in other publishing. We've had a couple of conversations about monographs, partly because we have them at Dartmouth. I don't think there's anything, there certainly isn't anything in the underlying technology that would make it hard to imagine it being extended to that. It's what it doesn't have at the moment really is a sense of wrapping up a series of articles into a thing in the way that a series of chapters would become a book, because as we are, the software designers weren't ever interested in publishing issues and volumes. But it wouldn't be a huge leap of imagination to think that that stage could be added. I think there really is a lot of capacity in this software to grow in those sorts of directions. We haven't been secretive about it, but we haven't. I think this is the first time I've talked publicly about the mechanics of what we're doing. But word gets out, you talk to people, and we've already had several places who are active in campus-based publishing contact us and say, we're really interested in learning more about this new bit of software you're using. Could it be built out into a system? So it's a good question. It's a good foundation on which to build, I think, something that could be really quite widely disseminatable in a couple of years.
Okay. Fred, your Anvil Academic sounds very much like two projects that were inspired by Robert Darnton when he was president of the AHA, namely the Gutenberg e-project and the ACLS Humanities e-book project. And I just wondered if you have actually read the postmortems that were written about Gutenberg E in particular. Kate Wittenberg wrote one, I wrote one, the AHA itself wrote a postmortem, because they had some very important lessons there. And one of the lessons that Kate brought out was that they made a big mistake by not thinking about designing templates up front. So they essentially had to custom design the technology for each project as it came along, and that proved to be crushingly expensive to do. So I just, wondered if you are benefiting at all from the experiences of that project, which in many ways seems very similar to what Anvil is trying to do.
Yeah, that Kate's thing I have read actually, and one of our kind of initial core principles, I guess, is that these works are the works that we want to publish are so manifestly different and composed and authored and displayed on such wildly different platforms that we don't want to get into the business of building a production or authoring or display platform. We want to display these things in their native environments and put them through traditional publishing's editorial and review procedures, and then be essentially their distributor and their marketer. But when it comes to building this sort of massive and massively expensive way to essentially create these things on our own platform, I just don't think that's possible or sustainable or even the right approach, because you end up on the creative side building in kind of artificial limitations to the author's vision, and on the production and cost side there's just no controlling it.
Denise from UNT again. As a researcher, STEM, but also as an administrator, I'm very impressed and yet perplexed and confused about how all of these activities might become an awareness piece for, I guess the terms that have been used have been stakeholders, and in my mind I think of the researchers and also the administrators. Catherine yesterday at one of our panels spoke to a space where maybe there can be, I don't know if it's a blog or a conversation piece, but as we keep having these panels, I keep asking the question, beyond the individuals who are in this room, how will this become a proliferative response? I mean, I'll go out and I'll tell our faculty, and that'll be a one-on-one, or through a website that most people don't engage. So, you know, once again, wonderful ideas, activities are happening, but how is the information put out there for researchers to become aware?
I can start perhaps to think about an answer to that. One of the ways that we can broker that conversation and keep it going, and indeed, in a sense, advertise services for faculty, are through the subject liaison librarians that we all have. We call them different things, but we all have subject experts who have departments and domains that they're chiefly responsive to. And we're beginning to think of them as essentially as a marketing force for some of these notions and ideas. You see this in some cases in institutional repository development, where that same group has been tapped to try and find ways to say what these ambitions are in language and terminology that makes sense to the particular audience that they're talking to. So we have a great advantage that faculty talk to their librarians. We don't always use that channel in the way we should, but I think it's beginning to dawn on us we have that channel there. We're also, and this isn't unique to Dartmouth, but we've been looking for ways in the last couple of years to tighten the links between library services and IT services. So we're a relatively small place, and we had the illusion that we knew, because we knew who was doing what, that we sort of knew what was going on. And it was quite an eye-opener to get the individuals on the IT side and on the library side who were directly interacting with faculty. This was a faculty-focused endeavor, to come together and talk about what they did. And I think the illusion was, because we saw these people, we knew them, we somehow had a grip on that. This was an integrated system. And it was quite a shock to learn that, you know, people were doing services we had no idea they were doing. We had duplicative services going on. We had things that we were telling the faculty we couldn't do, but in fact, this person 3 offices down was actually actively offering. So there is something. It's harder by degree in a much larger institution, but I suspect there's also a missed opportunity to pull together some of those individuals outside the library who work closely with faculty, and also think of them as a promotional force, if you like.
So that, I think David's absolutely on target for the institutional perspective, but then there's this larger perspective as well across institutions. How do we start having that conversation and chart that conversation and make it available, disseminated as you were, to other groups, so that that conversation isn't just happening at Dartmouth, at Princeton, at Purdue, at Penn State, et cetera, but instead there are conversations happening across those. And I think there are a number of different ways that can be done, but I agree that I think of this as a very critical moment for this to happen. I don't think we have a lot of time to act. Specifically, we don't have a lot of time to act if we still want to have a role and a voice in publishing peer-reviewed scholarship at the academic level, whether you're talking about university press or library. I don't care what center it comes out of, but somebody on the academy rather than an external commercial group selling those services to the academy. And that makes me a little bit more radical than maybe some of the people in the room, but I have some pretty good backing behind my feelings there. I will say that there are two things that I immediately thought about when you asked that question. One is that I have a husband who is a scholar in English literature. And my dear husband, who is extremely smart and very with it and very well respected in his field, and is even doing a digital-oriented publication with Johns Hopkins, although he didn't want to. They're forcing his hand. It took, I mean, I've been involved in this, and I've been talking about the scholarly communications crisis for years. And it took him receiving a leaflet on campus that was a Spark leaflet before he actually got how relevant it was to his own day-to-day environment on campus. So the power of having advocacy materials circulating is sometimes more powerful than the one-on-one conversations can be, which is a good thing because those can circulate much further than a one-on-one conversation as well. And then two, we have all of these really important spaces. We have AAUP, we have SSP, we have MLA, we have ACL. You know, we have a proliferation, ARL, ACRL, you know, across the library field, the publishing field, the academic field, but there's not really a grouping of those that allows for the type of exchange of information that would be really helpful, I think, in this particular moment in time if the academy is really going to control the outcome of its scholarship and take on ownership of that situation before someone else takes over a large portion of it. And I'd love to see, you know, some of the people who are speaking from positions that actually have the capacity to build those kinds of bridges. I'd love to see that start to happen.
I just wanted to share an anecdote that came out of some research we did last year, where I think on one hand, what you've been talking about is bringing together all these wonderful different kinds of initiatives, but we saw something that was quite amazing to us. We were just trying to find out on a campus in the UK if people could, you know, can anyone here identify where all the digital projects are? And that was a real stumper. We went to a department head, and how about just tell us what the projects are in your department? Oh, there aren't any. We're like, well, on your website, there are 3 or 4. Just tell us about those. And this is what the process looked like. And we're not talking about any high-level, you know, policy debate. We're talking about, could there be a list of things? So, you know, that kind of work, for sure, has started to happen. It seems so easy. It seems so simple. But even that hadn't been happening for a very long time. So what that means is that there may not be a sense on certain campuses of even how much activity and how much there is at stake if you don't even really know who's playing. So I think even at that first level, just looking around and seeing what's going on could be a good start. We've heard of some places, I think Princeton even, a couple of places where some interesting grassroots efforts have started to percolate, where people just start coming together and comparing notes, mostly out of a feeling of isolation and, you know, wanting to just be in company with others. And so a meeting like this and hearing about these initiatives and finding ways to pull them together is great. The other thing I just wanted to mention quickly, because I wondered if this is part of what you were getting at too, you know, for that wider world, even beyond a campus, you know, how does the word get out about this? And we're always wondering, you know, how much of it is within a community to kind of share information about the projects that are important to them. And so we keep looking for these great organic solutions to how that would work. And I found something quite humbling, which was that, you know, for several examples, you know, Galaxy Zoo out of Oxford, another fabulous science project, you know, with, you know, many, many, many users. You know, it was featured on the front page of the BBC online. So some of this is not a coincidence, and some of it's not impossible to figure out. There's a real roll up your sleeves, get the publicity machine going, identify the people that care about it, and find ways to get the message to them. So not a particularly glamorous solution, but probably worthwhile.
Hi, I wanted to follow on with your discussion, your mention of the list. The list of digital projects. And this is really a question of sustainability in the setting of the academic sort of environment around innovation. It's great to have a list, but what happens to those projects on the list when the funding runs out, when the faculty member, if it's a faculty-led project, moves on to a new idea? And I was thinking particularly in terms of Anvil, if you're not controlling the platform, if you are mediating as a publisher for those platforms, what do those platforms look like in 10 years when the folks who are working on them aren't working on them anymore, whose responsibility is it to maintain them? And are you assuming that a publication is does it become a publication at a point of stasis? Do you expect that it will continue to become new and refreshed in terms of content? This problem of the digital project, the proliferation of them, and the sort of built-in notion that academics are going to continue to innovate the parasite model, maybe even sort of the self-cannibalization model, is of interest.
Yeah, these are just horribly vexing questions. I was talking to Andy Stauffer at Nines a couple weeks ago, and he told me they look through their things and they feel like they have stuff in there that needs to be peer reviewed and redesigned because over time it's come to look dated. One of the reasons we're working with Internet Archive is that we can kind of store and catalog and describe reiterations of these things. And they have, I think, a pretty good, probably as good a preservation strategy as I know of that can keep these kind of dead platforms breathing. But, you know, other than saying that it's something that we're hugely concerned with and working on, it's not a problem that I can think of that anybody solved to the point where you can reliably preserve these things the way you can preserve a printed book, you know, for hundreds of years. I mean, I can't even find or even get files from my own work from a few years ago, just because I switched computers. And software comes and goes and all that. So, I mean, I don't have a ready answer, but it's also not something that we're ignoring. I mean, it's clearly one of the biggest problems that you face when you decide that you want to publish and curate and preserve digital media.
Maybe one more question.
Can I just follow on real quick, Martin?
Oh, sure.
I'd be remiss if I didn't mention we're wallowing in this question right now. We have an NEH grant to figure out what institutional strategies are to sustain this digital content. And we're going to be doing a handful of deep dives where we look at several institutions and try to figure out if we can piece together how they're doing it. The short version, I won't give anything away, I really don't know any answers yet, but is, you know, you start to see solutions on the storage and preservation side because the humanities content gets roped in under a lot of the science and research data. But what you still don't see are the solutions that have to do with, okay, how do we look at it again, and is it still valid, isn't it still useful, and does it need to grow? Because as you know, that work isn't funded. That gets done off the side of people's desks, as they say, and as a labor of love on weekends and things like that. So I don't think that piece is so clear. I think the first question is there a solution at a university level? And then maybe the next more lasting solution, is there something that even transcends one university that might be, you know, something where almost like a lab setting or a center setting where there are people who are funded to do this work and who, you know, who can use part of their time to do it. Right now what you see is a lot of people's borrowed time coming in from a lot of departments and a lot of favors, which we know is not, it's working okay, but it's probably not ideal.
Okay, we're going to have some instructions about the birds of a feather, but first, please join me in thanking our panelists.